Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here with a new PB&J card class, and today we'll be making a holiday card featuring stamps from Penny Black's newest collection, Season of Hope. And I am continuing on with my blue themed cards, and here is a look at the card that we will be creating today. I was going for sort of the look of a snow-covered lake in the moonlight. And the stamp that I've used to do this is our Cling Stamp 40-765 Quietude. And there are so many possibilities with this stamp. I'm using it for a winter scene, but I actually think this could also be really beautiful for fall, spring, or summer, so any time of the year. Now, before we begin, I wanted to mention that I will have a full supply list up on screen at the very end of the video, including the stamps and all of the other supplies and colors that I'm using. So if you want to check that out in detail, just hit pause when it comes up on screen. So to begin, I'm stamping onto Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. This is a cold press paper, and I'm using my Misty Stamp Positioning tool. I am inking this up using Ranger Archival ink, and I'm starting with just a cobalt blue just to put down kind of a base layer of color. Now, using the stamp positioning tool allows me to stamp multiple times using multiple colors and media. So next I'm adding some darker color onto this using my ARTEZA Real Brush pen. This has the tip like a paintbrush, so I'm kind of painting that color onto the stamp. And then I'm going to lightly mist that with water and then stamp that down. Then I can take my paintbrush while it's still wet and sort of blend out those areas to give it a nice, smooth, hand-painted look. And that base stamping keeps some of that detail, and then the marker that's spritzed with water gives it that nice watercolor effect. So you can see there how quickly we've got our first forest. Now I want to go ahead and ground this image in here, or this the trees, so they aren't floating. So I'm going to just color onto the stamp using that brush, and again just kind of blending things right away before it completely dries. So these markers are a water soluble marker, so that is what I recommend for this technique. Now I'm going to use them to, actually I'm going to grab my ink pad here, just a very light color, again to just help capture that detail. Just getting that along the bottom. This color is actually a mini archival ink pad. This is sky blue. Then I'll go on top with the marker. So those archival ink pads are permanent, so they're not going to blend or do any bleeding once I add water or misting or painting on top. So you can see it's got some of that detail, but then I can go in with that marker ink and my wet paintbrush and sort of blend it out, give it a smoother watercolor look. And I'm just going in and just adding some variation, some areas of light, some areas of dark. Even if it's still a little bit wet when I stamp, that's okay too. It just gives it a softer look. And this is just a matter of going back and forth, stamping, inking, painting, until you're really happy with the look. Your first time you use the stamp is going to be more experimental, trying and building up different layers, but as you use it more, you will kind of get a system, or you'll know exactly what you want. You can start with darker colors, and I always like to start light because I know I can always build up more. I don't like to start too dark, so you will see that as I'm stamping and painting. I go darker, the braver I get, the further I go on. I did add some marker directly right onto the paper, and then I am blending that out with my paintbrush. Here I want to get those birds up in the sky. You can see I've just traced around a circle up there to create my moon. I wanted the birds to be flying across, right across the moon. So you can see that I position that. And then here I'll use that darker color to get these sort of grassy reeds. Using the ink pad to get the tops of those, but being careful not to get that darker color down onto sort of the beachy area. The mini archival ink pads are really handy for that because you can kind of twist and turn them to get the ink right where you want it. Now here I've grabbed one of those real brush markers and I'm just looking at the stamp. You can also look at your stamp packaging if you need some help sort of visualizing where some of those lines will go, but you can really see them. And then I wanted these to just be a little bit stronger, a little bit thicker. So I actually just took after I stamped it, took my real brush marker and just traced right over the top using the tip of that. Because it has the tip like a paintbrush, it just keeps adding to that hand painted look, which I love so much about this style of stamp from Penny Black. So again, I'm just playing around. I felt like those needed to be grounded just a little bit more, coloring directly onto my paper. And then you'll see I will go in with my paintbrush and blend that out. Now these will blend on the Canson watercolor paper. If you want to have a little bit more freedom with blending them, you may want to try working on on Bristol smooth cardstock. They're a little bit easier to blend. I like having a little bit more control and them being a little bit harder to blend, which is why I'm using this type of paper. But depending on what is most comfortable and most fun for you when stamping, don't be afraid to try some different types of paper when you are working with these stamps or you're working with water-soluble markers such as these. So once I have that all stamped and colored up the way I liked it, I'm going to begin by now painting the sky. So I wanted this to have a moon, so I just took like an old paper that I had punched. I don't even know where it was from, but it was in my stash, a piece of scratch paper that was the size of the circle that I liked, and I traced around it with a pencil, and I just used a mechanical pencil, so the line is very thin and I don't need to go back and do any erasing. And I'm putting a very light layer of blue inside. Didn't want it to be stark white. Now you can see those birds were stamped with an archival ink, so they are permanent. They're not going to blend. I made sure that was dry, and then I am going on and adding a light wash of color to the sky. So I've just colored with my markers onto an acrylic block, and I've mixed them with water to create a palette off to the side. And I like to do this because then my colors of my sky will tie in to the colors of my stamping, which is especially nice for a monochromatic card. I think that they all sort of are in the same family or live in the same world. So I can keep using those same markers to paint my sky, and again starting light, and then I will definitely get much braver as I go on. Now I'm going to be inking this background and splattering it with a lot of snow, so I'm not too worried about it looking perfectly smooth. I also think that gives it a little more interest and excitement, almost the look of clouds. I wanted that moon to really pop, so that paper is still kind of damp, and I just colored with that marker, and then I'm working my way up to where I colored with a wet brush and just allowing it to sort of bleed and blend out. Sorry, I'm off camera there a little bit. I find it helps me to sort of twist the paper for more comfort for my hands as I'm working. And I really liked how that added so much dimension there with the moon. So I will go on to make that sky even darker and even more dynamic so that the night sky becomes much darker than the light snow and ground that is beneath it. So you can see here comes that bravery, almost scribbling on there and then going in and blending. And again, that background is still a little bit damp, not super wet, but just a little bit damp, and that helps with the blending as well. But again, like I said, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's going to get splattered and inked, and so you do not need to stress over any streaks or lines that you might see in your background. Now when I paint around these trees, I am being careful to try not to paint right on top of them because I don't want the blue from the trees to start bleeding up into the sky because they do have that water-soluble marker that was used to stamp them. And I just kind of continue with this technique on all areas of the sky. I like how that marker lets me get right up along the edge of the moon. Then I can go in and blend with my paintbrush and water, kind of working my way up to that edge, and that helps that not to bleed over into the moon area. So I also went in here and grabbed my markers that I used and just added it, wanted to darken these up a little bit more, add a little bit more dimension. So I'm coloring directly onto the paper, using my stamping as a guide, and then just going in and very lightly blending that out. And boy, I think that added so much to these trees, giving them a much more dimensional look instead of very flat like they were looking before. Now I'm going to pick up a very light color, and I just kind of wanted this to sort of be a little bit more color. Just can't go totally monochromatic, and also tie in the moon with sort of that snowy lake down below. So I put a touch of that color up on the moon, and then I'm blending this out down here on the snow, not coloring all of the areas, but just a bit here and there. And that dries pretty light, you'll see in the final picture of the card. Now again, don't be scared. I know that sky kind of looks like a hot mess right now, but it will be fine by the time we're done. Again, just fiddling here with some darker shadows. Give it a little bit more feeling of night. And then here I've got some gouache white paint that I'm mixing with water, and here comes the fun splattering. I'm going to do one layer of a splattering, then some inking, and then more splattering. And I'll kind of show you what happens when you do that. So just adding lots of splatters up on that sky. Now I felt like as I was doing this that I had that rich blue down at the bottom third of my card, but I wanted to have that in a third place on that card. So I'm going to dry this panel, and I'm using that same cobalt blue that I initially stamped those blue trees with. I am going to do some inking to my background. Oh, not yet, I lied. I'm picking up some of that gouache white paint and just brushing it over down here in the snowy areas, and it really softens everything up, kind of puts a light layer of snow and snowbanks and even more added interest. And it will pull some of those colors that I have painted and blend them out as well. Now here will come the inking that I was talking about before. I'm just going to take that cobalt blue, an ink blending tool, and a foam pad, starting off of the edge and working my way on in a circular motion. I want to apply that up on these top corners. And to me, this is what finally finished this off, because I felt like I had that nice dark rich blue on all areas of the card. Otherwise, the sky was just looking too light for me compared to that stamping below, and this just balances everything out. Now, where I had splattered that white paint, it is still going to be there, only it's going to be a little bit lighter blue. So I'm going to keep that there. It adds sort of like a lighter snow in the background, and then re-splatter some more really bright white on top. So you just get a very snowy look with light spatters in the background that kind of take on the blue that was inked on top of it, and then the white splatters on the top. So here is that finished card. Now I also wanted to show you another color variation using the same stamp and very similar techniques. And here it is. Again, this time I've just given it a peekaboo look. So I'm just using a small portion of the stamp, and I love the way this turned out too. There are so many ways that you can use these Scenic stamps. Like I said before, I think you could really play with this and do it for all seasons of the year too. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website and blog, and I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned here in just a second, up on screen, I'll have that full supply list as promised.